Coming up on America Sews, our guest is Lisa Mackey.
Here to show a fast, easy way to make a t-shirt memory quilt.
Then Chris Dollinar teaches perfect piping. Stay tuned. Welcome back to America Sews. I'm Sue Hausman, and today we welcome back a very special guest, Lisa Mackey from Crooked Nickel. Welcome back, Lisa.
Thanks, Sue. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you're here, and last time you made a quilt in a really easy way, and I was excited about the steps to do it, but now what I'm happy about is today you've got something that I've been asked a lot for. Tell us about it.
Right, and we had a lot of requests for t-shirt quilts done in a simple, easy manner, and we have tackled that now.
That is really good. Let's take a look at some of the t-shirt quilts, because I know grandmas are making these for graduations. Moms are saving t-shirts and not knowing what to do with them. Take a look at some of the ones you brought for our wall and tell us about them.
Right. This one over here, I call it a life memory. It comes from Disneyland all the way to the Marines, college, favorite sports, running events that they've been in. And that really is a memory quilt.
This next one has less t-shirts.
Right. This one is beautiful for a wall hanging. It has 12 t-shirts in it. Once again, we call it a mini memory.
Mini memory. Okay. And I love New York and coyotes and the American flag and Michigan and Kansas City. Wow, Kansas, all the different places perhaps that this person had gone to school or been.
Right.
Talking about going to school. Oregon State's over here on the wall.
And isn't that a beautiful college quilt?
And I think what I want to point out is that a lot of times people might not even look at that and know that every one of those squares, except for the outer border squares, is started as a t-shirt.
You're right.
And you're going to tell us how to do that.
Let's do that.
The one on the table is very unique, and it's very similar to what we're doing today.
Right. Talk about a memory quilt. This was all t-shirts from a gal sorority. And took, as you can see, not everything fit in the square, but this gal knows exactly where this t-shirt came from.
And I think that's the important part. You've got one up here where the words are not all in it, and something I'd like to say about that Cat in the Hat is that we couldn't go out and copy a copyrighted item like that. Right. But we bought the t-shirt.
Right.
So we have the fabric to use.
And that makes it all okay to go ahead and use it in another item like a quilt. Nobody's going to see this folded up in your drawer. Right. So let's get it in a quilt and enjoy it.
Yes, and so we got to get started here. The other thing, though, that I do notice is these don't go in the same direction, and you're going to talk about that.
Right.
It's different than what normally we see them going all one direction, and I like the variety. It's really great.
Right. Now, this is our t-shirt.
Okay.
And once again, we're going to talk about cutting the square from your t-shirt.
Yes, so just take your t-shirt with some kind of a logo on it.
It needs to be pre-washed.
Pre-wash it.
All the t-shirts need to be pre-washed.
Okay.
But this is when the fun starts.
Okay, so I know you cut with a template.
Right. Template is a 10-inch template that we're using.
Now, most templates have a coating on them, don't they?
Right. And so you need to take the coating off of the template.
And that's part of the manufacturing process. And I know sometimes people tell me, I have these templates and this plastic's coming off of them. They've been using them that way all these years. Yeah, so pull it off before you start.
Okay. And the other thing is it gives it a nice clear look so when you're looking through it to make your cut.
Good.
You can do it with straight on squares, or you can turn it any direction you would like to.
And we should probably point out that we have a cutting board under here.
Right.
One of those turning cutting boards underneath. So
which work great.
Right.
So if you have a turning cutting table underneath.
Otherwise, you could cut this on any cutting board with your rotary. You're going to use a rotary
cutter.
Okay.
And the other thing that I like to say is this t-shirt quilt is to be enjoyed from all angles. So don't be worried about the placement or how you're cutting it. Get the most important part of the t-shirt quilt, of the t-shirt, in your cutting of your square.
And it's okay to go up into the ribbing like you have there.
Right. You can go up into the ribbing. That will fit into the technique also.
Okay.
So the other thing I like to tell you is
So now
I
you would
cut
just turn it,
through both
Oh.
the front and the back. And the reason being, it gives you a nice stable cutting texture rather than doing just one at a time.
Okay.
This other piece that you'll use on the back can be used for a great dust rake.
There you go. Or if it was like a logo front and back you were trying to cut, you could cut single thickness.
Absolutely.
Or you could actually embroider on t-shirt like some special message or maybe the label for the quilt.
Or
And
the
then-
child's name.
Aha. And then cut
Birthday.
it. Right.
And then you're going to lay it within
Okay.
the
And then
design
go
you
ahead
would
and cut
like
it.
and just cut it out. Something else I've heard about is people going and having a specific silk screen done on a t-shirt special and then put it into the quilt.
Great idea. So you can make t-shirt logo too,
Right,
and know that you're going to have the right one that you want, and maybe you were short one t-shirt or something.
Right.
So you could use the back. And
Absolutely,
do
and
some
then have
embroidery.
something
Sure.
put in there.
Perfect.
So that's
once-
how we get our t-shirts ready to be put onto our fusible grid.
And so do you usually kind of press them flat before you cut them and then cut them out? Now
No,
you're-
I don't. You don't
you
have
just
to
lay 'em
press
flat.
them.
Okay.
Because we're going to iron them right now onto our fusible grid.
Okay. And see, this is the difference from when I've made t-shirt quilts. What a time saver, because I've always had to back all those t-shirts with some sort of an interfacing. And you're not going to need to do that
We
with
don't
this
have
technique.
to do that.
Okay.
Because we are using a fusible grid. So we have glue on one side and not on the other. You can always feel it. It's got a small texture to it, and that is the glue side.
If you scratch your fingernail, you can even hear it.
Right.
Yeah. That side, this side's smooth. Okay. And the grid lines are on point, aren't they?
They're all on the diagonal.
On the diagonal.
And that's how our quilts end up on point with our t-shirts.
Okay, so you cut according to the amount that it calls for. So in this case, what size are we making? We're making
The small.
the mini me quilt. So you need 1 2/3 yards of that fusible grid.
Right.
Okay, and 12 10-inch t-shirt squares, and then 2/3 yard for the fabric squares around the edge, and then of course all that's given the sashing strips. Good.
All
okay.
right. So to get started, I want you to turn around and look at the quilt and see that on the very top of the quilt, we have fabric squares and not t-shirt, because if we had t-shirts up there, we would have cut through the center of the t-shirts.
Aha, so it's like half square triangles that frame around the t-shirts. Otherwise, like Mickey's head would have been cut off.
Right. So we don't want that.
Okay.
The grid is printed on point, but when we work on it, we turn it. So it's on point, and now we can work with it in rows.
So get it so that your grid is going straight. It's a lot easier visually.
Absolutely.
All right.
Now, the other thing that is a must-have is an applique pressing sheet.
And I have that one over here.
What this does is it allows you to use a very hot iron and fuse your t-shirt square on this, but it protects the grid from melting to your iron.
Okay, that would be important. You can't just iron on the fusible side of a grid.
Right.
Okay.
It will melt and come all over your iron. The other thing that is important is when using this, it protects the ink that is on the t-shirt.
Sure, a lot of times this would be like rubbery, like fused, made at a t-shirt shop, and
Right.
it would come off on your iron. I
Right.
got it. So it protects the t-shirt and protects the iron.
That is so important. It's a 1-inch grid, so our 10-inch square is going to fit perfectly within the markings.
Okay, do you have a suggestion on the amount of time that you held the iron on it?
I suggest 30 seconds per fabric piece on
Okay.
these t-shirt quilts.
And no steam, of course.
No steam, because it's a flexible piece of Teflon and will not go all the way through.
So the steam wouldn't go through, just dry iron.
Right.
Okay, great.
Now, when you're done, you can double check yourself to see if you've done it long enough. Take your nail and go along the edge and see that it is all fused.
Because t-shirts tend to roll, so be sure those edges are fused down.
Right. And now this is all fused.
But here again, I point out that now this is the interfacing on the back of this t-shirt square, so you didn't have to do that step first before cutting those squares. You just cut the squares.
We're all stabilized right now.
Okay.
So as we continue to lay out our squares and our t-shirts, we have a 2-inch grid opening between each square.
So when you laid these on, you left 2 inches, and that was obviously easy because it's just leave 2 squares. And then you laid the next one, leave 2 squares. And here we see around the edges those solid colors, and that that grid is so we can know how to do that. I got it. Okay.
All right?
Yeah, perfect.
So in these openings, we're going to lay our sashing strips, and they will fit and border around all of our squares.
So you have cut these with a rotary cutter?
Yes.
Okay.
Once you do your long sashing strips, which are going to go horizontally,
so put those down
the
first.
Then we're going to come in and we'll put long and our short sashing strips will go on the sides.
Okay.
All of these will be fused on with the applique pressing sheet and your hot iron. Once again, you always have to use the applique pressing sheet or the ink on the t-shirts will come off your iron.
Okay.
So you become very close with the applique pressing sheet when doing this.
Great tip.
All right. Once we have all of the sashing strips and the squares ironed on, then we're ready to sew.
So you have one here that you've done that to. Okay. And we'll pull it over toward you. There we go.
Now, the thing with this technique is none of the fabrics touch each other.
Ah, okay.
Because when we're ready to sew, we're going to take it and fold it right sides together along our sashing strip where none of the fabrics touched each other, and we get an automatic fold.
I see that. And the other thing I want to point out is this grid is very, very lightweight, this fusible grid. So it's not adding bulk to this at all.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
This will be your guide for your seam.
All right.
And we are going to do a 3/8 of an inch seam.
Okay, now would you start with the end one like this and then just work your way down, or do you start in the middle?
I like you to start in the middle for the balance of the quilt.
So start in the middle. I'm going to do a short one right now just for time, but you said start in the middle and work one way and start
Right, and do both sides of each sashing strip before you move on.
So we take this over to the sewing machine. We're set up. Now you have some tips about setup and needle. You said 3/8 inch seam. Why are we using a 3/8 inch seam, Lisa?
We're giving a little bit more forgiveness in the seams with the t-shirt quilt. First of all, it's a heavier fabric.
Normally we'd use like a 1/4 inch, right?
Right, in a regular quilt.
I know that's what you used last time for your quilt with regular cotton quilting fabric, but you're saying because of the little roll in the edge of t-shirts and the heaviness, this is what you'd use. Most people would probably have a guide foot for their machine or could get one as an accessory. And so normally we use this 1/4 inch with guide, but again, there's lots of different guide feet available. This is a edge stitching foot, comes flat on the bottom for what I'm using. Also comes with a little groove on the bottom for decorative stitches.
Right.
But we want the flat one for this.
Right.
So I'm going to now stitch, and I'm going to just keep stitching with that right along the edge. Do you have any suggestions? Straight stitch, obviously, on stitch length?
You know, I think with the t-shirt quilt, you don't need to get it so doggone tight as far as the closeness of your stitch.
Okay. I'm using 2.5.
That would be perfect.
Would that be good?
Yes.
And then the next one would be this one. And I know you have a suggestion on this one, to start the other direction, right?
Right. You always flip your quilt back and forth,
So
sewing with the sashing strips on the top. And what that does is it gives the quilt an opportunity of not getting distorted. If you went all in one direction, you sometimes will get it to go kitty-wampus.
But what's amazing here too is the way this is folding right on that groove, and that's because there's no fabric in there.
Right.
And no pinning. Is that, do you find people kind of complain and say, oh, don't I have to pin this? Don't I have to pin this?
Well, so many times, the gals that are using this technique are either in a hurry or are brand new.
Okay, but
And sometimes the pinning can get overwhelming for them.
so look at that. And everything matches, and now that's great. So you would just do this all the way across on your long sashing strip pieces.
Right. Now we're going to fold it the opposite way and come back and do our short sashing
So
strip.
once those, that's,
It's instant gratification.
it is, and you've got one underneath here that's all stitched. Let's take a look at that so people can see, because I see you've pressed it in a certain way too.
Right. We always press away from the sashing strips so the seams lay within our squares.
Do you want to show that on this one? I wanted to point out earlier, and I forgot to mention, that we are working on a pressing surface. People, when they lay their fusible grid down, need to be sure they're on a surface they can press on, not on their dining room table or, okay,
Right.
something that won't be damaged by the heat of the iron.
Absolutely. You need to protect whatever you are ironing on if it is not a ironing table that is made specifically for this.
Okay, so
We're going to go ahead and press from the back side, and you can use light steam and get all of these seams laying down nice and flat away from.
and they kind of go that way. They just want
They
to do
do.
that, don't they?
They do.
And here's a good example of that. And then when you come back and do the crosswise too, they just tend to want to do that, don't they?
Right. So then the front will have
It's amazing. Yep.
cornerstone in here,
Oh, it makes
and
the little
everything
cornerstone.
matches.
Well,
Isn't that fun?
I've had several people call me already this year wanting to know how to make t-shirt quilts. So I am so happy to tell them this easy way. But for those that don't want to make a t-shirt quilt, you have a suggestion, and I'm excited about this is just the same concept, right?
Absolutely. We're going to use fabric squares, 10-inch fabric squares, use the same technique, fusible grid, fold and sew, fold and sew.
And once your quilt top is done, you just back it. And in this case, probably no batting even with this minky, but you could do...
You can do batting, absolutely, and go ahead, Sue. I can tell you're
Quilt.
excited.
I'm just really anxious for you to show them your newest idea, because I think this idea is great. Tell us about it.
Okay. In my travels, staying in hotels, they always have that beautiful piece of fabric on the end of the bed.
And I know you call it the bed scarf. What a great idea.
And I thought, how can we make our own beds look like a 5-star hotel?
Right.
So I'm using our 10-inch squares, sashing strips. We ironed in cornerstones for a little bit different look here. But they're so simple, you can have one for every season.
Well,
of
and
the
then,
year.
then the big pillows to match, done the same way, right? Done on the
Yes.
grid. So the same concept, doing it on the grid. But every season of the year, let's take Christmas, I'll take it over here, and look at what we have. We have a new look for
Spring.
spring. Isn't that cool?
Isn't that fun?
And it would be so quick to make. And look at that.
And
a new
here's our
look
summer.
for summer. This is just, I'm excited about this. And so the same concept, what's so neat about this, I think, Lisa, is people certainly won't make a t-shirt every day.
Right.
But once they know this technique and they know how to do this, they can do so many different things.
Absolutely. It is so much fun to share this and have instant gratification for any level of quilter. It really
Wow.
is.
Well, thank you so much for inspiring us to not only make t-shirt quilts, but to go home and make our bedroom look like a 5-star hotel.
Yes.
And now we're going to take a look at what Chris has brought us as a quick project.
Okay.
We're looking at the corner of a placemat that has perfect piping. And here to show us how to do it is the perfect piping lady, Chris Dahlner.
Hi, Sue. Thank you so much. Lisa, memory quilts are great, and using old T-shirts, great idea.
Thank you.
Well, you know, I saw this, and after Lisa's presentation, I thought the one that we cut up, I'm going to do a little wall hanging for her because this was one of his favorite T-shirts that we cut up and that his kids gave him a number of years, like 10, 15 years ago. So I thought that would make a cute little wall hanging with the piping to frame it.
Exactly. The piping just adds a great accent to any project.
And of course, it's not limited to placemats. You did this darling little purse. Tell us about that.
Now, the decorative stitches were actually done in the embroidery hoop using some shiny rayon thread, and the purse was pieced together, incorporating some piping in the seams.
Perfect. And you would recommend the shiny rayon thread for your embroideries and for anything decorative like this, right?
It would be very, very cute, yes.
And then for sewing, you'd use regular thread.
Yes, that's right.
So how do we get started on this piping?
How do we get started? Now, piping is simply a cord covered with fabric. And there's different sizes of cords available. This is a teeny narrow cord, and then we have a medium-sized cord, and then a big fat filler cord, which we traditionally think of using for home deck projects, just like this pillow. Correct.
Okay.
Now, the key to making perfect piping is the fact that we use the appropriate foot for the size filler cord we're using. Now, for this mini filler cord, we're going to use a mini piping foot. And there's a groove on the back side where that filler cord just fits perfectly as we're feeding it underneath the sewing machine.
So the underside of the foot's what's important, because
Absolutely.
that's so that's a little tiny groove. But what if you have bigger cord?
For our medium size, there's a piping foot, and it comes in both a clear and a metal version, where again that groove just allows it to feed underneath the presser foot perfectly.
And virtually all brands of machines today have a piping foot available as an accessory.
Yes. For the really fat filler cord that we like to use for home deck projects, the welting foot is ideal for that. Again, the groove on the bottom side gives it it feeds your filler cord and creates your piping perfectly.
So how do we get started on this?
Now, we're going to make some mini piping today, and we like to get started using some bias of our fabric. And bias, I think, is important because it will just curve around your filler cord beautifully.
Okay.
And hug it perfectly. Simply going to select a straight stitch on our sewing machine. You, of course, can shift the needle slightly if you'd like, but we're just going to work with straight stitch, snap on the mini piping foot.
So center needle, straight stitch, and if you wanted to get closer to the cord as you stitch, you could always move the needle position.
Yes. Now, we'll just place this underneath the presser foot.
Okay.
And you'll be able to see that the filler cord is fitting right underneath that groove on the bottom side. And as we stitch, we're making perfect piping.
That is what's so amazing to me. The foot, regardless, I mean, if you're using the right size foot for the right size filler cord, it like guides it. And so now instead of cord, you have piping. But you've got another trick because you cut that kind of wide. Show us your other trick real quick.
I like to cut the fabric a little wider because it gives me a little room for error. And once you create your piping, you then will simply trim up this excess flange.
Okay.
And this little tool will allow us to do that fast and easy. There are two different sizes that you can cut this flange to. You can cut 1/4 inch, or you can cut a 1/2 inch seam allowance, depending on what size project that you're working on. And so the groove of your piping's right in that groove. Slide your rotary cutter, and you now have piping with that perfect 1/4 inch seam allowance.
And that's key for the set-in too. And here you have just an example of your 3 different sizes.
The 3 different sizes. You can see how dramatic welting can be and how it just adds a little touch of color using mini piping.
Okay. Well, we'll have complete instructions on the website. Thanks to you, Chris. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sue.
And thank you, Lisa. Great program. And to all of you at home, thanks for being with us. Until next time, happy sewing.
Details from many of the projects shown on this series of America Sews with Sue Hausman, including instructions, sewing tips, product information, and more, can be found online at americasews.com. America Sews with Sue Houseman has been underwritten by Robeson Anton Textile Company, manufacturer of embroidery and decorative threads for over 100 years. Robeson-Anton.com. Sulky of America. Sulky, create with confidence. Makers of decorative threads, stabilizers, books, and transfer pens. Sulky.com. Rowenta, professional products for professional results. RowentaUSA.com. The Warm Company, manufacturers of warm and natural quilt batting and Steam-A-Seam fusible webs for quilting, crafting, and wearable arts. WarmCompany.com. Be sure to join us next time on America Sews with Sue Houseman. A complete set of 4 DVDs with all 13 episodes of America Sews Series 2900 is available by sending a check for $24.95, including shipping and handling, to America Sews, 31,000 Viking Parkway, Westlake, Ohio, 44145, or by calling 1-800-358-0001.